Welcome to Chalk It Out, Talk It Out. We are going to be talking about consent and boundaries, and specifically how to have these conversations with the youth in our life. So we are New Hope. We're a nonprofit organization. We assist survivors of sexual and domestic violence. We also are really focused on kind of that anti-violence movement. We want to not only have a lack of violence in a person's life that we support, but really focus on their entire well-being. So we, want people to be able to live their life free from violence and harm and also thrive. We support 41 different cities and towns in Massachusetts. It is divided up into two larger sections. There is the southeastern region here on the right side. This is in that teal color. And then we have our south central region here in Massachusetts on the left side, which is in that purple color here. The reason they are split is because our southeastern area is services for sexual and domestic violence, whereas our south central area focuses specifically on domestic violence services. These are just a couple of the programs that we offer. One of our biggest supports is our toll-free confidential hotline. It is 24/7. You are able to remain confidential throughout the entire conversation if that is something that is important to you. If you are looking to start services with New Hope, this is where you would start. If you have any questions, if you have some concerns, but you're not exactly sure what exactly you need, you're more than welcome to call our hotline, 1-800-323-4673. We also have begun within the last year this web chat. This is similar to the hotline where we are here to try and provide resources and information for folks. However, it is not a 24/7 web chat. We do this typically Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. If the office for New Hope is closed, like if it's a Monday holiday or something like that, or the weekend, then the web chat will be closed as well. So we're here in this space just to kind of let y'all know there are conversations around consent and sex. It can be very uncomfortable for some folks. We don't often talk about it directly in our society. So when we are having these conversations, we just have some things that we ask of you, just kind of knowing that because it will be an uncomfortable conversation for many people, to try and be comfortable with that discomfort. Try and be mindful of what we are doing and what we are saying within this setting. Trying to understand to listen, not just to respond, different things like that.
All right, so my name is Emily. I am the Community Engagement Specialist out of our Milford office, and I am here to talk to you all about consent today. So there are many different definitions of the word consent, but the definition we use actually came from the Planned Parenthood definition, and it is defined as to make mutual, voluntarily informed decision between clear-minded, of-age participants before any and every sexual act. So something that I want to also add to this definition that we're going to be talking about today is that consent is not just for a sexual act. We use it in everyday forms. So we're going to teach you a little bit about that as well. So this is a great graphic also about what consent is. We'll quickly go over it. So the first one is active. So everybody always thinks that consent is just yes means yes, but the true definition is that anything but a yes means no. So it could, if somebody gives you a maybe, if they say unsure, take that as a no. And that's active consent. It's also a choice. So the person has the right to feel comfortable with their decision without feeling pressure or coerced into saying yes or no. And it is also a process So it's ongoing and not just a one-time thing. So one person might say, yes, you can hug me, but another, you might not feel comfortable with holding hands. And then the last thing it's based on an equal power. So again, it's not forced or coerced, and it is also something to keep in mind if somebody is underage, drunk, asleep, or any other vulnerable position they cannot give. And the best thing you can do is always respect your partner or your family member and listen to what they have to say. So an acronym that we use often for consent is FRIES, and that stands for freely given, which is F. R is reversible, so at any point you can retract your consent without feeling pressure to. It's informed. It's also enthusiastic, so if somebody's unsure about something, you have to give them an enthusiastic yes or no. You don't necessarily have to be, I can't speak right now. Enthusiastic is like you have to be sure that you are wanting it. Don't feel like you have to give consent, and specific. So be specific about what you want to give consent to. Anybody want to add anything, or did I cover everything?
I think you got it. So for this slide here, we just have some examples for folks to kind of look into. So whether you are not used to having conversations around consent, boundaries, things like that, this is a great place to kind of start. You know, reflecting on these questions of like, how do you know something is not okay? What do you look for? Kind of thinking about how this was brought up or not brought up specifically in your youth. You know, when you're talking about communication, are you looking for body language? Are you looking for verbal information? How someone else in your family might be looking for one or the other versus what you are looking for? Just kind of realization of these nonverbal messages and, you know, lessons that we're getting about consent, and you know, reflecting on these to be able to understand yourself and where you are in this journey is a great place to start in, you know, then having this conversation or these conversations with youth as well.
And something to also keep in mind before we go into boundaries is that everybody's different comfort level about different things. It sort of relates to boundaries. So I might feel comfortable giving you a hug, but not everybody is. So actively showing consent with things that you are and are not comfortable is okay.
All right, so now we're going to move into boundaries, and my name is Corey, and I identify with the pronoun series she, her, and hers. And boundaries, they are a limit that helps define you and or your needs as separate from others. So we want to make sure that we have boundaries that are clear and maintained. So lack of defining boundaries could mean that we are at risk of being hurt or of hurting others. Lack of reinforcing or maintaining them, that could mean that we are in danger of being victimized. And everyone has the right to boundaries. You have the right to set your boundaries with everyone. So this means that we have a responsibility to respect others' boundaries. So if you're going to ask people to be please respectful of this and this, then make sure that you're also, you know, doing what you're saying, that if someone asks the same of you, that you're respectful of them. It's possible that we weren't shown or taught these in environments when we grew up, and that it can make it more difficult developing our own limits. So we typically learn about boundaries or normalizing lack of boundaries from our early life experiences. So that's a reason why it's so important with children to make sure that you encourage them to communicate and use your words. As a former preschool teacher, we always used to encourage our kids to make sure they use their voice to express their thoughts. And that's the beginning basis of being able to get them to express their wants and needs. So our types of boundaries are physical, which is personal space and physical touch; emotional, which is feelings and personal information; sexual, which is different aspects of our sexuality; and intellectual, which is our thoughts and ideas; material, which is money and possessions; and time, which is use and need of time. Also too, for Material things too, like in reference to youth, that could be in reference to your bag, your purse, your backpack, or your locker, and also your room. So for boundaries, some ways for tech tips are, number one, some healthier habits. It's important that technology is useful and it also has drawbacks. So it's really important that you chat with your youth about being intentional with their digital consumption. You know, are you using the screen time as a treat, or is it a resource for school, as a tool to pass the time, or help them become more aware of habits that they will have or will form? It's really important to have crystal clear communication. Boundaries are different for every person and every family because we all have different values. So help youth understand boundaries more and as a more positive tool by explaining why we are putting each one into place. So communicating our reasons for safety, health, privacy, and more behind our digital boundaries is important. So like, you can't just like say, hey, we're going to do this on your phone and then that's it. Like, you need to explain to your child why you think that step that you're going to take with their phone is important and what that means to you in order to do that. So they understand the safety precautions around your choices. And then it makes them feel like they're more a part of the situation too, that they're not just being told this is what's happening. And then model motivation. So just like everything else, youth will be looking to us and observing our actions. Youth pick up on things quickly. So they could be thinking, does my caregiver's actions match what they are telling me? Do they practice the same habits for the same reason? So model the things that we want for them to motivate youth. So you want to practice what you preach. So if you're telling your child that you only want them on, social media, on Facebook and Instagram for 2 hours a day, then you should make sure that you're monitoring that same I can talk right now, that you're going to model that same behavior as well for yourself. So then they can see, and then they'll understand like, oh, well, my mom's doing that. She doesn't think that's necessary for me to be on Facebook for 2 hours. So I'll do that too. So boundaries exist in all kinds of ways throughout our lives. Some boundaries are really big, like boundaries between countries or states, and some boundaries serve as rules so that people have the same expectations, like age requirements for voting, driving, drinking, and alcohol. People have boundaries too. Sometimes personal boundaries aren't as clear as laws or boundaries between countries. And sometimes they can take time to figure out. Each person's boundaries aren't fixed, which means that sometimes they can change or be different for different people. So for example, in referring to like, someone in middle school who is first navigating with their romantic relationships, they may not be sure yet what they are interested in for setting boundaries because they haven't been in that scenario. So like if they're dating someone for the first time and then all of a sudden their partner kisses them in public and they realize I'm really uncomfortable with being kissed in public, that's how they can start to use their voice to say, you know what, it makes me uncomfortable when you do this. So that's just an example of something that they can set for themselves.
Another example that we have used in the past and talking about the pandemic and everything, and going back to our discussion of like tech and changing boundaries. I know a lot of folks have had to change boundaries around how often young people are on technology or on the computer and things like that, because over the course of the pandemic, when classes were happening all online, kids had to use their technology a lot more for schoolwork. And so that's another example of, boundaries not being fixed and changing over time. And as the situation changed and new things came up, families had to have conversations like, how does that impact our technology time and what are we using technology for? So an example of boundaries changing over time as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, because it's, they always tell you about the dangers of having your child on, screen time so many hours a day. And then it's like, you tell your child, well, you've been on it too much. And then they say, well, that was for school. I want to do this now for me. So you just have to be really, make sure that you set really, still let them enjoy the things they want to enjoy, but make sure you regulate.
All right, so now we're going to move into our part of the presentation that sort of talks about how we have these conversations. So to kick off the section, if you're watching this recording instead of participating live, we just ask that you spend a few minutes, maybe pause the recording, reflecting on, for you, what gets in the way of starting these conversations around consent and boundaries, or what makes these conversations more difficult to have? What aspects of that do we find challenging or create barriers for us engaging with youth in conversations around consent and boundaries? So usually when we have those discussions, we'll get some real life examples from caregivers like this or that, and we'll be able to engage in some discussion of examples through that way. But instead, I'm going to list some things out in this slide and give some concrete examples for folks to kind of illustrate these principles. So when we talk about inclusive and accessible language, right, instead of making assumptions like, oh, if I have a child that's a boy, their partner is going to be a girl, so I'm going to say girlfriend and use she pronouns. So instead, we might recommend folks use the word partner that doesn't have a specific gender attached to it, maybe using gender neutral pronouns like they, them, and maybe saying things like if instead of when, because we don't want to make assumptions about what experiences people will have. Going on to ongoing and frequent, right? So we talk about being able to engage in conversations with more frequency than just one. I think sometimes we get this idea of consent conversations happening with the talk, one high pressure conversation that kind of has to do with specifically sex and sexuality, but instead reframing our understanding so that we can think of this as a series of conversations as opportunities arise that don't necessarily have to be about sex and sexuality, although they definitely can be. And this allows youth to kind of process over time and kind of receive consistent messaging, normalizing that conversation, and reducing the pressure potentially for everyone involved. We talk about conversations being calm and casual, so relaxed body language, facing each other, being eye to eye, especially if you're speaking with younger children where the height difference is going to be really big. You don't want to be like standing over them. That kind of creates an intimidating posture. We talk about having kind of ongoing eye contact, not like I'm staring you down, but not completely avoidant either. And we also talk about being careful of tone with body language. So we talk about how sometimes if we shift it into an authoritative or challenging tone, it may cause the youth to shut down and create a dynamic that doesn't allow us to move into being open and honest. And certainly not last but not least, is the appropriate time and place. We talk about sometimes the natural opening for these conversations or the questions that youth have kind of occurring what might be considered inconvenient, right? Like if you're running from thing to thing and a question pops up, being able to speak with the youth about like, hey, like maybe we can't talk about this right now. Maybe there are other people present, but, setting a specific date and time with them to kind of say, hey, like, let's revisit this, after dinner when we're winding down, picking something that's flexible that both of you can choose to engage in that conversation when it might be more comfortable for you. All right, and so then that leads us into being open and honest. So no matter what the age of the youth you're caregiving for, we recommend that we do our best to answer questions completely and truthfully, even when it might be uncomfortable for us, rather than lying to youth. Obviously, we all have our own boundaries of what does or doesn't feel comfortable. So it's completely within our right to say this is just not what makes me comfortable at this time, but just doing our best not to tell lies to folks, and can cause confusion, and can kind of destroy that trust that you're working to build throughout the rest of this building of the space. With that is also trying not to criticize or joke, especially when talking about questions, even if we have good intentions, like we're trying to lighten the mood or keep it casual. A misplaced joke or like shifting into that authoritative correction can cause kids to feel uncomfortable and kind of shut down as well. And then last but not least, keeping discussions flexible and varied. So part of that too is like being able to reschedule these conversations, giving youth the option to opt out, offering them resources that you find are safe, that they could maybe review on their own, or you guys could review together instead of having a verbal discussion. And I think with this too, we talk about engaging in activities while we're having conversations. So an example given, like, playing with Play-Doh, so you have something to focus your attention on while you're having an uncomfortable discussion. Playing with chalk, you can focus on that drawing. If it's like an older young person, maybe you're out for a walk, so it's kind of a quiet time and you're kind of engaging with other things on the walk. Maybe you take a pet with you on that walk, so there's kind of, you can pay attention to the pet or pat them when you're uncomfortable, but just having those variations to kind of create comfort, give choice, and make space for everyone to process the information in their own way.
And also too, just a reminder to make sure that you shut down your phone and don't have any technology or TV or whatever on when you're talking to your youth. I know from my own experiences that if I'm trying to talk to my daughter and then I check my phone, she gets very upset with me and thinks that what we're doing isn't as important. So it's really important to make sure that you're present and engaged.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, if your child doesn't want to have that conversation in the moment, be respectful of that. Don't try to force the conversation on them, because that might reduce the dialogue that you have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So here we have some open-ended questions, right? So these are questions that require a full answer, and that help us kind of understand where youth are coming from, rather only giving them the option of saying yes or no, or kind of leading them to an answer that we're specifically looking for or we're assuming. So these open-ended questions can help us like create those open spaces where we reduce our assumptions about what youth know or what their perspectives are, and kind of casually explore further what their current understandings are and where they might need our support in learning more. All right, so now we're going to move into some examples based off of youth ages.
So you're with your young persons, dropping off a library book in a return bin when they start to become upset. The young person slams the door to the drop-off bin, begins to cry, and shouts loudly about the book. We can help regulate our young person and then talk to them about identifying what was happening in their brains and bodies. We can ask our youth where they felt upset in their bodies and what that could mean to them. We can check in about what they felt like they could and or couldn't control, and we can then offer support and options to them for when those feelings in their bodies happen again. So as a former preschool teacher, I can tell you that these are scenarios that would happen all the time. And for me, the first thing I would do if a child is instantly upset over something, I would check in with them and say, are you all right? Check your body. Are you hurt or bleeding? Okay, so now we know your tears are from something else. Before we start off, do you need a hug? And ask them, because sometimes they're just so overwhelmed emotionally by what has just transpired that they don't really know what they want. And so maybe they need a little bit of something to help ground them, to check them in. And so usually it's been most responsive to be that they usually ask for a hug, and then they're able to talk to you about what it is that's bothering them. I think that's something that's really important when you're talking to children that are under 4, is to make sure that when you're speaking with them, like having the having an action with them, like the Play-Doh, like Ashley said, is great. Also, too, you could bring out dolls or stuffed animals and talk to them about what appropriate touch is. And I know for me, when I was a preschool teacher and we used to talk about appropriate touch, I would explain to the children that their bodies are theirs and that no one has the right to be touching parts on their body without asking permission, and that they need to, I would explain to them, Miss Corey has to touch your body only to clean you, just like mommy and daddy, that kind of thing. So they understand that this is Miss Corey's expectation is she only assists me when she needs to clean me, and that's the end of it. Trying to think, always make sure that when you're trying to talk to your child about consent when they're under 4, is make sure that you are engaging with them, that your tone is welcoming and calm, and that if they don't want to talk about it at that time, that they don't have to, but that it's something that you revisit with them on a regular basis to make it a part of their everyday vocabulary where they're comfortable to talk about it down the road.
Yeah, and I think this is a great place to like remind folks too of what we were kind of saying earlier, is that consent and boundaries doesn't have to be specific to sex or any kind of sexual situation. Like consent and boundaries can be with anything. You know, we do it multiple times a day, every day, as we give consent for certain things. So if, you know, that is a concern for some folks about talking to their kids under the age of 4, just kind of having that realization that we do talk about consent and boundaries, and it doesn't have to be a sexual topic.
All right, so now we're going to move into the early elementary school age. And the scenario here is you're watching your young person or persons play with a friend. One friend decides they need to take a break and play alone. This upsets your young person because they were having fun. So similar to what Corey said, the best thing to do in this situation, first off, is to try to regulate their emotions and calm them down before you try to tell them what's been going on, because you might not have a productive conversation if they are still hyped up in what's going on, hyped up about the situation. And the best thing to do is teach them how it's not your young person's fault for why the person might need to take a break and play alone, because they might at some point be in the reverse of the situation where they might want to break and play alone. And how would they want their friend to respond if they had to do that? So the best thing to do, like I said, is talk about their emotions first and then explain how everybody has their own boundaries.
Yeah, I think a lot of this relates to helping youth like build empathy as well, kind of understanding like, you know, even if they feel like they would never be wanting to play alone or without a friend, like being able to build that empathy of like other people do have that, you know, feeling or something like that. So that's always a great tool to like utilize at this age.
All right, so in this example, you're watching a TV show with your young person or persons where 2 best friends are arguing. One friend on the show is upset because the other friend lied to hang out with someone else. Right at this time, when we're watching the show on commercial breaks or after, we can ask the young people open-ended questions as a concrete way to think about and discuss boundaries. So having this example, we might talk about like how the friends on the show handled it, and do we feel like that's how we would have responded, or how we might have felt, or how we would have acted differently. We could talk about how it might be really hard to tell a friend that they hurt us, or it might be really hard to hear that we hurt a friend. And how do we handle that? So I think with this is a really important example. You know, in many of our presentations in the past, we kind of talked about the importance of being able to use different media as examples. So for this age group, we kind of talked about like a TV show. I think I see that a lot in like TV shows and movies for youth, is like sometimes friends argue and how do we resolve conflict. But even for younger ages, we can use children's books in a similar way. We can use, like we said, movies, and other different examples in the media as like a really concrete example to kind of ask these questions of youth and help them understand their role in boundaries and consent.
I do recommend the books for 0 to 4.
All right, so then we have those, mid-teenage years. And although this does say 14 to 17, this could be, discussing with the person you're caregiving for, even if they are over the age of 17. Everyone kind of is developmentally different. And that kind of goes with all of this information as well. It's not a precise, they're this age, so I have to have this conversation. The people that you're caregiving for fairly well, so you can kind of use your judgment in deciding, what might be, ready to introduce into the conversation. But here we have, you and your young persons have heard the recent news of a student from a local high school who was sexually assaulted. For this, we can check in with our young people here, see how they're processing the story, ask them about their views on the contradictory information that's being said about the situation. We might be able to talk about how consent is flexible and not always a blanket response. We get to choose to say yes to certain actions and deny others, even when it is difficult. We can chat about consent, how consent means we get to change our minds regardless of the situation. And so there's a lot of different components to this. We chose this example specifically because we have plenty of high school students that have come to us asking about these situations. They know a lot of the news in whether it's locally, nationally, internationally, but they're very familiar with, the Me Too movement, things like that. And so this kind of goes back to, although the conversations can be uncomfortable, it's still something they're, talking about on their own, or they're curious about learning more. So we really wanted to kind of address this situation specifically. Checking in with them, seeing how they're processing, this could be a great place to ask those open-ended questions, kind of checking in and saying, oh, what have you heard, even starting there, because you don't know what they have or have not heard necessarily. They might hear things through friends or at school that you didn't realize that they had been aware of. Very often when it comes to sexual assault or sexual violence, there is, not always, but there very often is contradictory information. And that can be very confusing and very, could weigh a bit on adults too, who are trying to figure out the situation, if you will. So just kind of realizing that this might be something that is affecting them as well. If they're hearing a he said, she said story, if they're hearing information that the person surviving the violence is saying one thing, the person who has committed the harm is saying something else, seeing how they're interpreting that, how it's sitting with them. But really, not only exploring that information, but being able to help them learn, this person has the right to say no because they're a human being. That's part of what consent is, having that flexibility, being able to change our minds, being able to negotiate. It's a huge part of it. So this is kind of how we are looking at this conversation here, especially it's such like a difficult topic for some.
And also at the end of the conversation, reaffirming that if something ever happened to them, that they are a safe person they can talk to, and having that ongoing conversation.
So we do have additional resources here. These are something, whoever you're getting this slide presentation through, we will send along this resource sheet as well. So they're clickable links, but we do have some websites. We have New Hope specifically here, tips for caregivers. They're little cards, again, based on the ages. This is a conversation script builder. This is built through, I believe, Planned Parenthood. And this is an amazing tool. It is something that you can put in saying, I want to talk to someone I'm caregiving for, and they are in this age range, or they are this age specifically. This is the topic I want to talk about. And you hit like a generate button, and it can give you prompts to be able to help have this conversation. You know, some people like to be fully prepared and know, like, this is what I want to say before jumping into the conversation. And if that's you, this is a great resource. And then we also have consent K through 12 resources. This is, you know, school specific, but it does apply to outside of the school environment as well. There's a few YouTube videos here. Boss of My Body and Consent for Kids are made specifically for children to explain, you know, boundaries, consent, limitations with, you know, consent and around their bodies. And then the third one here, My Body, is actually a music video. There was a collaboration between two folks that were really just seeing a lack of positive representation in consent in the music industry. And so they created kind of this youthful consent positive song. And so this is the music video that goes along with this song. So you're more than welcome, you know, to look at it yourself and see, you know, if this is something your kid might enjoy, what have you. And then finally, we have a lot of social media resources as well. So Sex Positive Families, they have some wonderful, medically accurate, honest information on their website. Diverse Kids Books, again, as I think Corey, Emily, and Ashley had mentioned, Kids Books is a great resource to be able to bring up conversations and things like that. So this is a way to have diverse representation within those books and those conversations.
Oh, also too, Heather, I'm sorry, but with small children, it's a way to make them feel like what you're talking about is special because you're sitting down to do a book with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the book. It's this is called Can I Give You a Squish? And it's kind of like a hug, but it's giving that example through these stories. So it's not just about, you know, telling them this is what consent is, this is not, it's showing them, it's demonstrating, and it's a really cute way of doing it. And then Planned Parenthood of Greater New York, I believe it is. This is a Planned Parenthood account that is run by teen advocates. So it is for teens, by teens. It is incredible. I highly, highly recommend it. But we have a ton of resources here for y'all. We can always try and find some more for you, but this is a great place to start.
We will also be including a resource guide that the Milford Library put together of a bunch of different books about consent and boundaries for young kids all the way through teenagers.
Yeah, thank you. And then if you do need to reach us at New Hope here, this is our information. So again, we have the toll-free confidential hotline. It's 24/7. Our main office number, our address for our main office. Typically, we do allow walk-ins. However, with COVID, we do suggest calling ahead of time. We have our website and we're on social media as well. So we have an Instagram, a Facebook, and a Twitter. You're more than welcome to reach us there. You know, we post a lot of resources and information on those accounts as well. So if you're ever looking for more, you're more than welcome to follow us. So we just wanted to thank you very much and look for part 2 coming soon.